manage your calendar. And the reason for that is it directly affects other people if you don't turn up to a meeting on time. And yet, if you don't manage your email well, the corporations are okay with that because you can just work longer hours and get on top of your email. They don't mind that. Yeah. So what responsibility do they have there?
So I think I think part of this is just sort of cultural norms getting set. I think there's a lot of different ways people have been tackling that. Email-free Fridays, all sorts of different ways people are going about it. I think the point you made at the end, though, is the one that we're having a dialogue with customers around, which is they're not interested in solving the problem of how do I manage email better. I mean, that's a symptom, not the problem. The problem gets described as productivity that gets lost in informal work processes, exception processing, right? Most of the stuff that goes on an email are things that don't have repeatability. Where people actually have to get together and collaborate. They have to talk about something. They have to solve a problem. They get a customer answer. So there's a lot of things that can go on in back office, in well-described processes, in ERP systems and all that kind of stuff. The real problem we're talking to customers about is how do they solve this unstructured work problem, not how do they do more email. Because I don't think people think there's ever going to be a 25th hour in the day for mail. And that starts to be, I think, rethinking process, rethinking workflow around social concepts versus linear asynchronous document exchange, and I think you're going to see a lot of reinvention of corporate business process around very different styles of collaboration, which email will be one but not the only one.
Yeah. But the interesting thing is there's actually going to be pressure because an individual who is not efficient at being able to get through figuring out what's important and what's not means that the corporation is going to have a black hole at that point in its organization. Things are just going to disappear inside of it. So in fact, there is in fact pressure inside the organization to help them develop good cognitive practice around email. But I haven't really seen any of it yet.
Vis-a-vis being efficient, do you think I should not spend half an hour drafting an email? Dear unnamed medical company, thank you very much for your offer to enlarge one of my bodily organs. However, at this point, everything seems fine. Should there be any need for your productivity? Do you think I should just be rude and not answer? Yeah. Okay. Because obviously I wouldn't have any need for that. Yes, final question.
Look, my question actually follows on this concept of the document, because email I'm seeing as a platform, and instant messaging is another platform, but what people are exchanging here are kinds of documents. And some of the things are things that we really need to keep. It's the contract, which we're now agreeing to, and other things are ephemeral. They're, sure, I will meet you for lunch, and then it can be thrown away. But looking ahead, what happens to the document, because documents are based on writing, and yet now we've all got sound and vision and a lot of things coming online.
And don't solicitors, if you buy a house or something, don't they love talking about the documents, and I'll put the documents in my safe and the certificate of this, and it's all...
Absolutely. Yeah. The document is a big fancy special thing. It's got a capital D at the front of it. What happens now?
What's happening to the
document?
Will the
document die, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Can solicitors get rid of their safes?
So I think the notion of having a legally wrapped up, fileable, records manageable thing will never go away. I mean, it's a pretty strong concept. Well, I think the real question is what happens to the file. I mean, I think the way people work on documents needs to be fundamentally blown up and started again. I think it's a real big problem. I mean, right now it's not collaborative. It involves, all sorts of waste and transport. No one knows what's current. I think what's going to be very interesting is how do you turn the document into a fabric around which people can collaborate, get something done, do some real work, write something, at some point put a lock on it and store it so it's retrievable. But I think that you really, really need to start thinking about what is the reinvention of the document.
Plus
part
the
of this discussion.
Reinvention of the shredder too. That's a tricky one.
I was going to say, lurking under that question is another question too, right? About another piece of the nature of quote unquote the document is also about paper. And one of the things I was sort of thinking about as I was replaying this conversation in my head is this whole notion of the kind of the paperless office that was very much a conceit of the 1980s and 1990s, and I see people with paper all over here. Yes, you with paper.
Good man.
Good man, exactly.
And a mobile phone. It isn't turned off.
And there's clearly stuff about the stubbornness of certain sorts of things, and where paper goes away in all manner of places, it persists in others, right? And one of the things that is an interesting facet of email, unlike in some ways SMS and texting, is emails can be printed out, which means they get stuffed in your pocket as the directions to wherever you're going, or that instruction list, or the thing you need to give. Ironically enough, printing out emails and giving them to other people, a practice I find very endearing and sort of odd, but does nonetheless happen. And I'm sort of struck in thinking about all of this, about the things that are persistent and stubborn artifacts of social relationships, where paper is one of them. I mean, there is much less paper than there used to be, but there are all kinds of rituals around paper that have an interesting kind of relationship to email and to notions of digital, sort of the digitalness of things.
Just to end on this might be a note of hope. It's interesting when you have phone conversations with people and you talk about something and then you have to arrange a meeting. How often, instead of actually going through the process of arranging a meeting, you say, blah, 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 we've talked about it, so well, let's meet up next Tuesday. I'll send you an email to arrange the time. And in a way, one of the great things it does is free us from the drudgery of conversation. So you don't have to go through that process in conversation. Are you free then? Are you free then? And so that seems to me as an example of actually selecting what we want to talk to and keeping conversations at a relatively high quality and then getting the drudgery done somewhere else. What I want before we finish is one big thought from each of you about the future of workplace communication that may have occurred in the course of this discussion or may have been sitting in your brain for hours. Let's talk with you staring thoughtfully at the ground, Mark.
Well, I really do think that in a decade's time, we won't be talking about email, we won't be talking about the stream of this or that. We're going to be talking about what does it look like when I'm performing a task? What does it look like when I'm interacting with Genevieve around a project? How do I bring together all of the different pieces of information that I need, some of which are messages, some of which are knowledge, some of which are live things that are happening right now. And so all of this, the reason we're talking about is email dead is not because email is dead, it's not because email is dying, but because it is now taking its place inside of a larger constellation of other technologies.
Nice. Adele?
Looking forward, I foresee that corporations are going to be managing our work and our personal lives separately. So being able to segregate those worlds through whether it's through a device or through other mechanisms, I think it's going to be incredibly important.
And for us to segregate our work and
I think it's both. Being able to send an email from your personal email account, even though you're on a work machine, does come with, a lot of psychological burden.
Well, I was going to say
right?
the most important device in that is the brain and training that one. Alistair?
I think we'll stop talking about the transport and we'll start talking more and more about the outcomes and how to facilitate those.
And Genevieve?
Two things. One is when I was thinking again about the fact that, what's the data most recently? By 2014, 90% of all traffic on the net will be video, not text anyway.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, thinking about, what will a conversation look like where email, in the grander scheme of things, is a tiny percentage of the stuff that moves around the globe digitally. So, the conversation we may have then is instead, how do we think about different forms of asynchronicity, where the asynchronicity we're talking about now is textual, but the one we're talking about 5 or 10 years from now is visual. And that, for me, becomes another interesting set of challenges.
Yeah.
Well, folks, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for the studio audience for being here. If you've got any comments, just send an email in, although that might be a bit old-fashioned. Thank you. See you later.